Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first annual American Studies Film Festival. First, thank you for sacrificing your time to come watch our documentary. Our documentary is titled Immigration to America From African to African. This film is about African slavery and the hardships they went through in America. Produced by Lloyd DeLeon, Raul Rivera, and David Behines. Enjoy. African American slaves came mainly from Senegambia, which is a combination of Senegal and Gambia rivers. Today, those areas are Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Mali. African American slaves also came from West Central Africa. West Central Africa contains Angola, Congo, and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Gabon. The Gambia rivers was the main channel to transport slaves out to America. Slaves were easily persuaded onto the ship. A former slave named Martha King said a big boat was down at the edge of the bay, and the people were all excited about it, and some of the bravest went up pretty close to look at it. The men on the boat told them to come on board and they could have pretty red handkerchiefs, red and blue beads, and big rings. A lot of them went on board, and away they went. Another slave said that many were bribed with clothing, bells, and trinkets. One slave said that the men on the ship asked people to come and dance on the ship, and the next thing you know, they were away at sea. These slaves were abducted and lied to. The poor slaves were manipulated with false treasure and taken away from their motherland. As many as 20 million slaves were transported by ships. The helpless slaves went through horrid conditions within the ship. Most of the time, slaves were crammed together as tight as possible, no room to move or to create any type of maneuvers. The heat in the ship exceeded more than 90 degrees, and the odor of the slaves was stronger than your local garbage dump. The slaves were hardly supplied with fresh water and air. They had to go to the bathroom in a bucket or even sometimes just crap themselves. Some slaves tried committing suicide by jumping overboard or by asking others to strangle them to death. Another way they tried committing suicide is by refusing to eat, but the captains found a forceful way to make them eat. Slaves believed that their death would return them to their homeland and with their friends and family. Disease on the ship was easily transmitted because of poor hygiene and the way they were packed together. The most common diseases were the flex, smallpox, and scurvy. Usually, the journey could take 6 to 8 long weeks, but if weather conditions were bad, it could take 13 weeks or longer. The conditions of today's average homeless person were incomparable to history's African slave.
The Atlantic slave trade had its beginning in the middle of the 15th century when Portuguese ships sailed down to West Africa coastal region. The purpose was to trade for gold and spices, but the voyagers found that human beings were even more a valuable commodity. Over time, the trade in men and women supplanted other commerce, and the slaves' destination changed from Europe to the Americas, where plantation growing commodities for the international market initiated the massive transfer of Africans. In all, some 11 to 12 million Africans were forced carried to the Americas. Of those, roughly 1.5 million were taken to North America, or what became the United States. That they were forced to be slaves and to be forced to migrate to the Americas, which they have never heard or seen before. And for push factors, they weren't any push factors. They didn't want to go to the Americas. They were treated like animals and were forced in cages for the rest of their lives until the North won the South in the Civil War in the 1800s.
African Americans faced many obstacles, such as being sold and bought like objects. They were forced to be away from their family and friends and were taken from their homes. African American immigrants faced many challenges, such as being alienated and treated like lesser beings. They were sold to other slave owners and forced to work day and night, with little sleep and even fewer food. They were subjected to abuse, such as being whipped and being beaten, and even worse, killed. Even now, African American citizens still contribute to this day. For example, our former president was an African American. We all know him as Barack Obama. They gave us music that we still enjoy to this day, and artists that will always be in our hearts, like Michael Jackson and Prince. Famous leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who abolished segregation, are famous. African Americans contribute to pro sports like basketball, football, and even more sports. They also are great actors like Morgan Freeman and Samuel L. Jackson. Overall, African Americans contribute to our culture in many ways. Without them, we wouldn't be the great country we are now.
Okay, question number 1. How was the journey that any of your ancestors took when they immigrated to America?
It was pretty smooth. It was my mother and my father that came to America. My dad came off a military visa, so he brought my mom with him, and it was pretty smooth. So there wasn't any like obstacles they had to overcome, or like jumping fences or taking a boat or anything to get to America.
Question number 2. What was life like when they got to America?
Life was like pretty modernized because it was like the 80s, I believe, or the 90s, whichever one, and it wasn't segregated or anything at that time. It was pretty modernized and all that, so it was pretty normal, like that's like today.
Question number 3. What parts of Africa did your ancestors or your parents come from?
My mom and my dad are both from Nigeria. My dad came from Abuja, and my mom came from Igbo State. So they're two different like states, you could say, in Nigeria, and yeah, these are the places they came from.
Question number 4. Do you know any obstacles that your ancestors or your parents overcame? If so, what were they?
The biggest obstacle my parents had to overcome when they came to America was like adapting, and because like there was a transition where like something happened to my dad's military visa, so he had to like he wasn't granted the same luxurious military access in America, so he had to start from the ground up. I don't know, like it was weird. He had to start from the ground up. He had to work as a taxi driver and all that to make money and all that.
Okay, last question. Question number 5. Does any of your parents still follow the African traditions? If so, what exactly do they do?
Yeah, my parents are pretty Nigerian oriented, so they still stuck with a lot of their traditions. My mom, she makes a lot of Nigerian food, really good, and they watch a lot of Nigerian movies. They don't perform much traditions because they're pretty Americanized now, but besides that, it's just the food and the music.
All right, Chris, I want to say thank you for being interviewed. So
No problem.
Appreciate that.
King Gate.